The Tu-144 shattered the dream of supersonic passenger flight, pulled from service after just 55 passenger-carrying sorties, a loud, leaky, fuel-guzzling failure that couldn't even hold a conversation in the cabin without shouting. But stacked against the machines in this list, the Soviet Konkordsky was a nimble ballerina. These are cannons so absurdly massive, so crippled by their own weight that the simple act of moving them an inch became an engineering crisis. Today, we're counting down the most monstrous guns that were practically impossible to transport. Take the British Mallet's mortar, a 42-ton iron beast designed to hurl 1,100-kilogram shells at Russian forts. A crew needed 18 hours just to screw its barrel into the ground and prepare a single shot. When the smoke cleared, the military ran the numbers and realized its battlefield rate of fire was 1 shot per day. The project died, but that was just the logical endpoint of a centuries-long obsession with building guns too heavy for the Earth to bear. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and subscribe so you make it to the #1 spot where the loudest disaster waits. Now let's start the countdown. Tsar Cannon. Moscow, 1586, the reign of Tsar Fyodor Ivanovich. Mastercaster Andrei Chokhov pours 39,312 kilograms of bronze into a mold at the cannon yard. The result is a barrel 5.34 meters long with an internal bore of 890 millimeters. The largest bombard by caliber ever created. It was never used in a war. The cannon was a monument before it ever cooled from the casting. The fundamental problem was not a flaw in the metal or a failure of design. The problem was physics. Chokhov built a mortar-class weapon with a barrel length of only 6 calibers. To hurl its intended 800-kilogram stone grape shot, the gun would require a massive charge of black powder. That charge would generate pressures that made the weapon impossible to move between shots. The 8-cast rectangular brackets on the barrel hint at the logistical nightmare. A crew would need to dig a pit, hinge the 40-ton barrel into a fixed inclination angle, and brace it against the earth. Firing it was a civil engineering project, not a tactical decision. The decorative cast-iron cannonballs sitting in front of the gun today tell the rest of the story. Each one weighs roughly 1 ton. They were cast in 1834, 248 years after the cannon. Their diameter is too large to fit into the bore. They are a joke. Manufactured in St. Petersburg as a symbol of friendly rivalry with Moscow. The gun carriage beneath the barrel is equally fraudulent. Added in 1835, it is made of cast iron and features 3 wheels. The cannon was never meant to be fired from it. The wooden carriage that preceded it burned in the fire of 1812. Napoleon considered taking the cannon to France as a trophy, but left it behind. By 1860, it sat on Ivanovskaya Square next to the Tsar bell, another giant that was never rung. Voltaire joked that the Kremlin's 2 greatest items were a bell never heard and a cannon never fired. Traces of gunpowder residue found during a 1980 restoration suggest the barrel did fire at least once. A ceremonial shot with a reduced load and a long fuse dug into the ground. The bronze cannon was always a symbol of Russian industrial capability, wheeled out for foreign diplomats, a 40-ton paperweight. Mons Meg, cast in 1449 on the orders of Philip the Good. Duke of Burgundy, this colossal bombard was a gift to King James II of Scotland in 1457. Its barrel, forged from 25 longitudinal iron staves bound by shrunk-on hoops, spanned 13 feet in length and weighed over 15,000 pounds. With a bore diameter of 20 inches, it fired stone balls weighing 386 pounds. The sheer mass demanded 100 men to drag it just 3 miles a day. The carriage was a plain box without wheels, later upgraded, but mobility remained a logistical nightmare. The bombard saw action at sieges like Norham Castle in 1497, but its tactical value was crippled by its weight. The real failure was metallurgical. The wrought iron construction, hammer-welded from small pieces, created inherent weaknesses. When fired, the immense pressure of the gunpowder charge stressed the imperfect welds and joints. Over centuries, this cyclic loading caused fatigue, cracks. In 1680, during a salute for the future King James VII, the barrel burst. The English cannoneer's charge was likely too large, but the root cause was the degraded iron. The gun was left abandoned, later carted to the Tower of London in 1754, and only returned to Edinburgh in 1829 after public outcry. It now sits as a silent monument, its operational days long over. Pumhart von Steyer, In the early 15th century, Austrian gunsmiths forged this wrought iron bombard from longitudinal bars held together by heated rings. It weighs around 8 tons and stretches over 2.59 meters. The bore is a staggering 800 millimeters. A stone ball of 690 kilograms could be lobbed roughly 600 meters with 15 kilograms of gunpowder at a 10-degree elevation. The massive projectile crushed fortress walls, but the cannon itself was a logistical nightmare. Its sheer mass made repositioning on the battlefield impossible. Once emplaced, it stayed there. The iron construction was prone to cracking under the immense pressure of repeated firing. The low muzzle velocity and high trajectory meant accuracy was almost non-existent. Gunners had to aim by trial and error, wasting precious shot and powder. Transport required dismantling the barrel and moving it in pieces on heavy wagons, a process that took days. In siege warfare, speed mattered, and the Pumhart von Steyr offered none. It was a one-shot wonder that demanded a fixed position and a patient enemy. The bombard survives today in Vienna's Museum of Military History, a monument to the brute force approach that medieval engineers soon abandoned for more mobile bronze cannons. Dol Griet, Flanders, late 14th century. The city of Ghent needed a weapon to shatter castle walls, so its smiths forged a monster from 32 longitudinal iron bars, bound together by 61 heavy rings. The result was a wrought iron bombard over 5 meters long, weighing roughly 16 tons. Its bore was 64 centimeters wide, designed to lob a 330-kilogram granite ball. The sheer mass of iron was supposed to absorb the immense pressure of a full powder charge. But the real problem was not the firing. The problem was the ground beneath it. A 16-ton gun exerts enormous static pressure, and without a modern recoil system, the entire energy of the shot transferred directly into the mount. A wooden carriage would have shattered into splinters on the first shot. The only solution was to bed the bombard onto a permanent stone platform, essentially turning it into a piece of fixed architecture. This made the Dol Griet a logistical nightmare. It was not a mobile field piece. It was a stationary siege engine that required weeks of engineering work just to position it. In 1452, during the siege of Oudenaarde, the Ghent army had to drag this immovable object to the battlefield. When the siege failed and the army retreated, there was no way to quickly extract the bombard. The defender simply walked out, captured the massive gun where it sat, and kept it as a trophy for the next 126 years. The weapon designed to be the ultimate siege breaker became the ultimate war prize, simply because it was too heavy to flee. It finally returned to Ghent in 1578, where it was parked in a square as a static monument, the only role its weight ever truly suited. Folle Magd. Cast in the early 16th century for the Saxon dukes, this bombard was a weapon defined by a single, crippling contradiction. It was designed for a style of siege warfare that no longer existed. The gun was a massive wrought iron and bronze composite built to hurl a 285-kilogram stone ball. The sheer scale of the projectile was the root of every logistical nightmare that followed. A projectile of that mass required a powder charge so immense that the loading cycle stretched into hours, not minutes. The crew had to ram the charge, heave the stone into place with mechanical hoists, and then laboriously aim the entire assembly by adjusting wooden wedges and earth ramparts. The rate of fire was so slow that a defending garrison could repair a breached wall faster than the foul Magd could open a new one. Mobility was a theoretical concept. Just moving the barrel required a team of 24 horses, and that was before considering the separate carriage, the stone ammunition, and the tons of black powder. On anything but a perfectly dry, hard-packed road, the entire column became a stationary target. The tactical environment had already rendered this brute obsolete. By the time its iron bands were hammered into place, Trace Italian fortifications, low, thick, angled bastions, were spreading across Europe, designed specifically to deflect the kind of slow, parabolic fire this bombard produced. A direct hit was a matter of luck, not engineering. The gun never achieved a decisive victory. It was a dynastic vanity project, a physical assertion of power that consumed vast resources to deliver almost no practical battlefield effect. It survived, not as a war winner, but as a museum piece, a monument to the moment when the size of a cannon finally outpaced the physics of moving it. Tsar Cannon. In 1720, the court of Maharaja Sawai Jai Singh II in Rajasthan cast a weapon of pure intimidation. The barrel alone stretched 20 feet and weighed 50 tons. The bore was 11 inches wide, designed to spit a 50-kilogram iron ball. The foundry at Jaigarh Fort poured 100 kilograms of gunpowder into the breech for a single, legendary test fire. The result was a cannon that was fundamentally a static monument, not a field weapon. The core problem was a catastrophic mismatch between mass and mobility. A 50-ton cast-iron tube sitting on a high two-wheeled carriage generates a ground pressure that sinks into anything softer than solid rock. To even pivot the piece, engineers fitted the rear with a pair of removable wheels nearly 3 meters in diameter, turning it into a crude four-wheeled cart. But there was no recoil absorption mechanism. Firing 100 kilograms of powder behind a 50-kilogram shot would have converted the carriage into a shrapnel bomb of splintered timber. The barrel's 2 thick lifting rings and the incomplete crane lying next to it today reveal the real story. This gun was moved by block and tackle, not by draft animals. The legend claims the single shot flew 22 miles and dug a pond in Cheksu, a physical impossibility for a smoothbore lobbing a solid ball. The concussion was reportedly violent enough to cause miscarriages in nearby villages. After that one deafening blast, the Jaivana never fired again. It had no battlefield purpose. It was a forge master's flex, a dynastic statement cast in iron. The massive elevating screw and the floral engravings of elephants and peacocks are now protected by a tin shed frozen in place at the fort where it was born. Schwerer, Gustav. By 1934, the French Maginot Line was nearing completion. 7 meters of reinforced concrete and steel armor plating designed to be impenetrable. The German Army High Command asked Krupp to solve that problem with a single gun. Krupp engineer Erich Müller ran the numbers. To punch through from beyond the range of French artillery, the shell would need to weigh 7 tons. That dictated a caliber of 80 centimeters and a barrel 30 meters long. The fully assembled weapon would weigh over 1,000 tons. This was not a gun you towed. It was a railway event requiring 2 parallel tracks, specially reinforced, because standard rails would simply buckle under the load. The gun itself sat on 80 wheels across 40 axles. To move it, you first had to lay those double tracks to the firing site. Then you needed a crew of 4,000 men and 5 weeks to assemble the gun, dig the emplacement, and build the curved traversing tracks. Firing it required another 500 men. The operational logic was already collapsing under its own weight. A siege weapon that demands 5 weeks of construction within artillery range of the enemy is a paradox. It exists only if you already own the sky. The Luftwaffe had to provide constant air cover because a 1,350-ton target on rails cannot hide. When it finally fired at Sevastopol in 1942, it did destroy a munitions depot buried 30 meters below the sea. But after 47 rounds, the barrel was worn smooth. The gun had already fired around 250 test rounds, and now it needed a spare barrel fitted before it could fire again. The logistical footprint was so absurd that the Germans never deployed it a second time. In April 1945, they blew it apart in a forest to keep it from the advancing Red Army. The largest rifled weapon ever fired in combat ended its career as scrap metal scattered among the trees. Mallet's mortar. The year is 1854. The British Army is bogged down in the mud of the Crimean War, watching Russian fortifications at Sevastopol shrug off their conventional artillery. Robert Mallet, a Dublin civil engineer specializing in ironwork, proposes a solution, a shell-firing mortar of unprecedented scale designed to crack the heaviest masonry fortifications. His design calls for a 36-inch caliber weapon assembled from cast iron sections bolted together, firing a hollow shell packed with gunpowder weighing over a ton. Prime Minister Lord Palmerston personally intervenes to push the project forward. 2 mortars are ordered at a cost of £4,300 each, but the Thames Ironworks goes bankrupt during construction. The work is salvaged by splitting it across 3 separate firms, and the weapons are finally delivered in May 1857, long after the war has ended. Testing begins that October at Woolwich. The mortar is a monster. The barrel alone weighs 42 tons. It sits on a massive iron bed. The sheer mass of the weapon, however, conceals a fatal flaw in its very concept. The logistics of loading a muzzle loader of this size were a physical nightmare. The barrel is too large to be elevated for loading. Instead, the entire assembly must be lowered onto its side using a complex system of hydraulic jacks and pulleys. Crews then haul the 2,352-pound shell into the muzzle with block and tackle. The gun is then winched back into firing position. This process, from firing to reloading, takes hours. The test results are brutal. On October 19, 1857, the first shot is fired. An 80-pound charge sends the lighter shell 2,759 yards. The flight time is 23 seconds, but the rate of fire is a dismal 4 shells an hour, and that is under ideal test conditions. The stress of firing repeatedly damages the mortar itself. Each of the 4 test sessions ends with the gun breaking down. After 19 rounds, the project is abandoned. The problem was not just the weight, it was the fundamental mismatch between the weapon's strategic purpose, sustained siege bombardment, and its tactical reality. A siege gun that can fire only once every 15 minutes and then needs major repairs is not a weapon, it is a stationary engineering experiment. The 2 mortars were quietly retired to become museum pieces. One sits at the Royal Armories at Fort Nelson. The other, the test gun, stands outside the Royal Artillery Barracks in Woolwich, a 42-ton monument to the idea that a bigger hammer is useless if you cannot swing it. Some cannons were too heavy to fight, others were too heavy to even reach the battle. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Drop your idea for the next episode in the comments.